Well, good morning and welcome to a very special occasion. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum, and we are jumping off with our VJ, Victory Over Japan Day celebrations here. Here we got a jet coming in right there. Maybe we'll lose our audio. But we're the 75th anniversary of the official end of World War II. We'll be flying here in about 20 minutes. We'll have 4 aircraft up. In quite fittingly, 2 Navy airplanes, 2 T-28s in Navy markings, our C-47, which is a World War II veteran, and a T-6. But the Navy airplanes, there's a ceremony going over in Pearl Harbor today, and that is kind of poignant because that's where it all started. Now, I have Bob McKee with me today, a crew chief and a B-29 crewman. You're a radio man and a gunner, right?
I was radar operator.
Radar.
We carried 1 radar operator on a B-29, and it was full-time job, navigating to and from the target, identifying the target, and in many cases bombing the target by radar.
By radar. Now, where were you when it started, when Pearl Harbor happened?
I was in high school.
Okay.
In Wauwatosa, Wisconsin.
Okay. Don't say that fast, right? Wauwatosa. So you were there, and what was the reaction in the community when all that happened?
Absolutely bizarre. People couldn't understand what had happened like that. It was a Sunday afternoon, and myself, my brother, and a neighbor had gone to a local theater to see a movie in which Ronald Reagan was starring called International Squadron. It was about him flying with the English Air Force before we got into the war, and he was flying a mission over the English Channel at the time that the lights went out in the theater, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the theater manager came on and announced the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Oh my goodness! So that had to have been a terrible shock.
It was unbelievable for a bunch of high school boys. Walking home after that, we all agreed we were going to go into service, and within a year and a half, most of us had been in the service because we were 16 or something at the time that happened.
And so you ended up in the Army Air Force. Where did you do your training at, your initial training?
Well, our training was on the border of Mexico in Texas, something like that, in a place that nobody believed existed, right on the border, something like that. We got relief once in a while and liberty to go across the border and visit the Mexican side of the border, something like that. So
okay.
It was the first time many of us had any experience with anything like that.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So you went through training, and when did you know you were going to get assigned to B-29?
Well, it was several months because first they trained us as gunners, and they put us on B-17s and B-24s in South Texas and parts of New Mexico, where the heat was probably like it is around here midsummer, 120 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Those airplanes on the ramp, quite warm and uncomfortable. So if you didn't get airsick to the point where you became obliterated, then you didn't get the right training.
Is that what it was, right? The heat was so bad with that and the flying. So you now the B-29 had a remote gun with a remote gun sight. So how did you make that transition?
Yes, right. So it was remarkable. They had a central fire control gunner in the middle of the rear of the airplane, 2 waist gunners, a tail gunner, and there was guns in the front of the airplane controlled by the bombardier.
Okay.
So he acted as a gunner when it was necessary.
So what was the name of your airplane when you deployed?
Well, we had mostly Irish boys on board, so we came up with an Irish name which nobody could understand.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what it was even now.
Okay.
But it was an Irish name.
An Irish name on the B-29.
Like
when did you actually deploy to the Pacific? When did you go overseas?
Went over there probably around April of 1945. May, and so we were overseas in active duty about 3 months.
Okay.
And I stayed there till September the 6th.
Of 1945.
Because then we flew prisoner of war missions over Japan, dropping supplies into remote camps where they had American prisoners. And some of those were the most dangerous missions we flew, flying up the inner coastal side of Japan, going in between the mountains and under cloud cover looking for prisoner of war camps, something like that.
Oh, wow.
And the material was in 55-gallon drums attached to parachutes, which we dropped on site when we thought we recognized the POW camp.
Oh, really? Okay.
I hope we didn't demolish more veterans than we saved.
There you go. Now, you were on Saipan, right? Flying out of Saipan? And your first mission, I read your report was truck. Was your first mission truck, or am I wrong? You flew truck?
Probably was the first mission truck, like a practice mission for us to see if we could find the island and drop it with any kind of accuracy. So yes. And
truck was still occupied by the Japanese, but it had been pretty much bypassed.
Yes, it had.
Did you get any flak or any fighter opposition?
None at all. None
really?
At all.
Wow. So the B-29 was a pressurized airplane, but then went down lower. So were you bombing at a higher altitude, or were you flying relatively low?
I think relatively low, because we knew that the reaction would be minor.
Okay. Did when you started doing bombing missions over Japan, were those incendiaries that you were dropping, or high explosive, or do you remember?
Well, there was an option there. There were incendiary missions that were up there to decimate as much property as we could, and there were other missions that were specific to targets like aircraft plants, munitions dumps, and stuff like that, where you wanted to put it on an X on the target.
And that was mostly high explosive rounds or bombs. Did you see any fighter opposition or flak opposition on those missions?
Yes. At almost all missions, there was fighter response to us like that. The flak was fairly accurate. We usually came back, and the ground crew would admonish us for getting their nice, clean airplane damaged with holes in it and stuff like that. And they had to clean flak pieces out of the inside of the airplane, out of the bomb bay, in the racks and stuff like that.
Really?
They complained it would come out with a big, what you call, burlap bag full of the stuff that we brought back.
From flak, from exploding shells, huh?
That's right.
How close did the fighters get at that point? Did you see any? You could fighters?
Almost look right in their eyesight like that. They were so close they'd come right up and try to knock you off at near closure. Yeah.
Really? At point blank, yes. Huh? And you were down low enough. The Japanese didn't really have a lot of high altitude fighters, so you were down low enough where the zeros or whatever.
Most of our flights were medium height, something like that, so for accuracy.
15,000
like
15,000 feet.
The earliest flights were high altitude, thinking we'd have to resist a lot of exercise from their pilots and anti-aircraft. But basically, most of them were at medium height.
Did you or were you aware about the atomic bomb drops that happened? Did you know about the atomic bombs, or how did you kind of find out that the war had ended?
We knew about it when we dropped it.
Really?
Yes.
So you found out about it that day or whatever.
That's right.
Right. And what was the reaction within your group?
We thought it was remarkable. We thought maybe we had seen the magic wand come down and wipe out the end of the war or something like that. But it was stunning to be on a mission like that in which you drop a bomb like that, because the damage that was able to be verified by flights that went over later on, photography, showed just how destructive they were.
I think the interesting thing is, and what people don't now, 75 years on, is the option. There were two options, and it's been hotly debated, and I still get into debates about it, but one option was use the atomic weapons. The other was to invade Japan.
Yes.
And the loss of life with an invasion would have been pretty great, don't you think?
Everybody agrees it would have been tremendous losses, because the Japanese history in fighting any place was to the last man till there was no the last man. That they were all extinguished, something like that. So they wouldn't give up.
What now? You on Saipan? I've read your stories. There were Japanese holdouts still on the island, right? That were
They were in caves and places like that, buttoned up for the war. And many of them didn't get released until we went out and extricated them.
Did they? My understanding is that they would come down at night into the camp.
They would come down and raid our garbage cans at the mess hall for food.
Really? Were they still fighting, or were they just basically existing at that point?
Existing, trying to survive.
Trying to survive. Yeah. They weren't fighting anymore.
Yeah.
Interesting. So the I think, and that will be hotly debated probably from now. The use of the bombs will be hotly debated. But I've read the reports about what they were talking about the invasion, and the casualties would have been unlike anything we'd ever seen. Would you agree with that? Or, I think that was a prevailing thought at the time.
Yes.
And people at home don't realize, or we have the hindsight of history now, but when the emperor surrendered, the Japanese military didn't want to surrender. They actually went to try to find him, to kill him, so he could not. And he actually made a recording that they played because he wanted to ensure that the armed forces actually laid down their weapons. Did you guys know any about that at the time?
Not till after it was history.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you get into Japan at all after the war, or how did it wind down? There was a cessation of hostilities, which actually started before the surrender, right? I mean, they had started to wind down. They knew they were going to surrender, but how did that whole thing kind of play out at the end? Was it just over? Or how you were doing these POW flights and stuff like that? Did you ever get into Japan?
Yes, we did. We flew several POW missions, and the one I remember the most was the one we flew. The northernmost island of Japan was a remote camp. You had to fly up the Sea of Japan, which is on the facing Korea. Look for a long pier that came out from the mountains like that. When you found that pier, you turned in and you went up between the mountains under cloud cover and looked for a POW camp.
Oh, my goodness.
We found it, and how we managed from hitting the tops of the mountains, I don't know, but we were so close trying to make a visual identification. We found a place that looked like it, opened our bomb bay doors, dropped these supplies in 55-gallon drums on parachutes like that, and then flew out and landed at Atsugi Air Base in Tokyo.
Wow.
That was 6 days before we signed the peace accord on the battleship off the coast of Japan. 6 days before that.
I've heard about that there were American units that were starting to come into Japan and that they hadn't signed. What was the, you landed at this airfield. What was the experience like landing at the airfield?
Well, the experience there was that we were warned by the people that had come in earlier, our troops, to take it over, worried about the condition of the runways, the damage on it, the debris that was there, to be extremely careful in picking our landing site, something like that. And we did get down successfully. We loaded up on Japanese gas and told to get our out of there.
Right.
As quickly as possible.
Get your hiney out of there, right? Yeah, there you go, because we're broadcasting here. So you loaded up on fuel. Did the Japanese fuel you, or who were the ground crews?
We fueled ourselves on Japanese gas. There were no Japanese around. They were all interned. It was taken over by, I don't know which Army group, but there was our U.S. Army Air Force group in there and
Really?
Army.
Really? Did the Japanese fighters escort you in, or were there any at the cessation of hostilities? Were they still flying, or
were not flying.
They just stood. They
They were grounded. They were down.
How many B-29s went in there like that? It was just you, or
there were several that had targets up there, and I think that probably on that day, maybe a half a dozen B-29 went up to various POW locations and tried to drop supplies to allow them to subsist with medical, food, and clothing.
So the war's over. You're at Saipan, right?
Right.
How did you get home? How did you come home?
Well, we had to wait there until I think it was a couple of months after the war before we started to cycle back home. I think I got back home in November of that year. So it was almost 2 months after we landed in Japan that we were cycled back home.
Did you bring the airplane back, or did you come back on a ship? How did that work?
We brought the airplane back, and with as many high point people as we could cram in there. They weren't necessarily Air Force. They might be Merchant Marine, Navy, Army, something like that. Whoever they could get that could verify the time they had spent was crammed in that airplane and brought back to California.
Really? What was the route you flew back? Do you remember?
Yeah, the route we flew back was the same one we went over there. We went to the island between Saipan and Hawaii. There was a drop there for gas.
Right.
Back to Hawaii and then load up at gas and then back to the West Coast.
Wow. And then how long before you were mustered out of the service?
Well, they moved us pretty fast. So I guess within 20 days I was back in Wisconsin.
Wow. Can you believe that? Wow. So any thoughts? We're getting ready to fly here. I can actually see the aircraft getting ready to go here. What are your thoughts on all and being involved in just this? This was a monumentous thing for the United States. What are your thoughts 75 years on?
Well, first, I'm amazed at the scope of the campaign to put B-29s across all of that water, and with very few places to exercise saving, which was Iwo Jima, and the operation of the B-29 airplane was remarkable. It was remarkable. It had tremendous staying power, could fly for hours like that. The only thing that was a shortcoming is running out of gas.
Well, that's a bad thing, right? Did you have any engine
problems? It could ruin your whole day.
That it could. Did you have any? B-29s were notorious for teething problems. Did you have any engine problems with the airplane?
Yes, we did. It was quite common, something like that, because the airplane hadn't been tested for a long time, like a B-17 or B-24. So they were still going through that process when we were flying them over there. But fortunately, their devastating power on dropping bombs was effective enough to bring that war to an end.
Well, and I think everybody's happy that it ended and that we didn't have a further loss of life. So I want to thank you, for you are the greatest generation, and we want to thank you for coming out today. You can at home, you can come out and see Bob. Bob hangs out in our Pacific hangar. Hopefully, once we get past all this fun COVID stuff, I'm happy to see you. We haven't seen each other in a little bit.
I'll feel good to come on back like that, renew friendships, and pat some of these airplanes on the tail, and go in the airplane hangar that has the jets that have no propellers, which I have no idea how they fly.
Well, I don't sometimes either, to be perfectly honest. There's so many of them. Bob, we're here with Bob McKee today. Bob, I want to thank you for coming out today. I know that it's warm out, and you did that. I want to thank you for watching us at home. If you're on Facebook, hit that subscribe button. Or I'm sorry, if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Like us on Facebook. We can always use your donations. So go out to that Air Museum page and hit that donation button. And we're going to cut over with Greg here, and we're going to go to the flying airplanes. God bless all of you. Have a wonderful day.